Okay, it's 7 p.m. My time, so in France. Thanks a lot for attending this seminar about enhancing feedback collection. This is a conference about conferences, and if we want to improve, it's pretty important that we get feedback. And I believe that we all like to read some feedback, to get some feedback, to discover what we could do better, or to read some nice words. But some ways of asking for feedback are slightly better than others. Indeed, it's actually not that easy to just go to someone and tell them something, especially when that thing could be perceived as being negative. I believe that even when giving constructive feedback, there is a non-negligible chance that the recipient is going to only hear that, oh yeah, I suck, this was really bad, etc. And so I'm going to try to show various ways to basically de-dramatize this. Part of it is going to be based also on some data. So this was for the short introduction. So why should you listen to me? So my name's Kevin Desprez. I'm at this point a dinosaur. Like I became certified in 2002. I'm still a level 3 judge. I'm HIP with ASD, which means a high intellectual potential and autistic spectrum disorder, which means that I've got a strong tendency to digress because I also have attention disorder. So whenever I think about something, I start speaking about it, and while I'm aware, it's very hard not to. And while consequently, digressions are feedback I'm given on a regular basis, and I'm pretty sure that it can be discouraging for some people who keep telling me, hey, like you need to stop digressing that much, and that's only fair. So, yep, if you give me that feedback, it's taken. I promise I'm doing my best, but it's not always easy. I've been writing many articles on WhatsApp Docs, the blog. I will be, and Isaac carefully shared the link. I've not been writing like a lot in the recent years, but most of the content is still like pretty up to date. So feel free to go over there. And these days, I'm not judging anymore. I used to be a full-time judge, but now I'm a consultant in managerial innovation, which I usually define as teaching people that being assholes with their employees is counterproductive for everybody, not only the employees. That's obviously a very broad summary, but that's pretty much what it is. I'm a firm believer that the traditional managerial ways are fairly toxic. Now, various facts, random. I love traveling. I love traveling, and I love visiting UNESCO WHL monuments, because I believe that it's very important to understand where we're coming from to be able to anticipate the future. I love building Legos and bricks. That allows me to focus and fight, quotation marks, against attention disorder. I like Blastoise a lot, and I like cocktails a lot. So now, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about when asking for feedback, should we ask for some grades? What are the pros and cons of asking for numerical elements, basically? Then we're going to talk about should feedback be mandatory or optional? And also, and I realized that it didn't load here, but it should be point number 3 should be should we require feedback to be anonymous or not? Then we'll go into some statistics. And finally, I'll wrap up with a couple best practices about incentivizing feedback. And at this point, it's already 6 minutes. I'm the only one speaking, and it's a perfect time to tell you that I strongly encourage you to use the chat so that we can interact. If you've got questions, please ask it. If you are afraid that this question could be stupid, think about this. If you cannot understand what I am saying, the issue is on me because I am the one who is communicating. And also, statistically speaking, if you wonder something, at least one other person is wondering the exact same. That's really how it works. But because we are generally afraid of asking a question because we're afraid of what others could think, we tend to not ask questions. And I can tell you that as someone who's on the autistic spectrum, asking questions, asking seemingly stupid questions, has been my life. And really, I can tell you, but most of the time, I've not regretted asking those questions because I learned something, and that's what's crucially important. So speak up, use the chat, and if you like a remark, support it with an emoji. You've got questions, type them in the chat. Because we only have 45 minutes or 50 minutes, maybe it would be better to not use a microphone, but please use track B text. It's right in front of me. My slides are on the side, so really I'm not going to miss them. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay. In any way, if you have a question, do not wait until I ask, because you can type whenever you want. That's one of the core advantages of Discord. Having the chat is just awesome. So, let's start with feedback 1.0, the basics. So, I'd like your contribution here. In your opinion, what are the basic ways to collect feedback or to give feedback? And good evening, Martha. So, no worries. It was actually feedback that was given to me to provide an outline so that people would be would know what to expect. So, when given feedback, I generally act on it. Written, oral. So yes, definitely. I was more looking on which systems have been designed. Google Doc, yes. Sending constructive email. Conference feedback forms. Okay, in a conference feedback form, which means can you design to get feedback? Most basic. So Isaac is talks about reviews. Yes, definitely reviews. Okay, where you are right now is already fairly advanced. So you went in a shop that you found on Google Maps and you want to give them feedback. What are you doing? So Jeremy is like, are you talking open-ended questions, rating scales, options? Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about, and that made me realize that I need to phrase my question better. So indeed, we've got two main ways. We've got first the very classic star rating, or only give us a grade out of 5, something like that, which got very popularized by Uber mostly. And on the other side, we've got more like open questions. Is there anything you would like to tell us? Which Martha is exactly pointing out. It's like any comments or something like that. So now, what do you think? I'd like us to explore the advantages and and drawbacks of those. In your opinion, what are the advantages and drawbacks of the star rating system? Star ratings don't provide any actionable advice. Yes, indeed. Star rating, no clue of what areas could be improved. Yes. Ratings doesn't give you information. Yes and no. I mean, at least it does give you information as to the gut feeling or the impression of the person who submitted the feedback. Yes. Tobias points out star ratings give a good way to tell how one thing on average measures up against other things. So um, it so definitely it gives a way to evaluate. But now Brad is definitely saying something interesting. Is 3 out of 5 good or bad? And that's a crucial question. For instance, if you're an Uber driver, if you go below 4.2 as a rating, your account might be suspended, which pretty much means that as as a customer, if you do not put 5 star to an Uber driver, you wish that person stops driving, which is incredibly weird because this is not what should happen afterwards. 3 out of 5 should be the average, so it should be just plain. And Jeremy also points out that people put 1 out of 5, but they don't entirely know what that for. Some people can evaluate the product. Some people can evaluate the delivery, which is not, which might just be about USPS or any other postal system, not about the product at all. So you have no way to know. So sometimes, yes, it's not outstanding. But so basically what we can conclude is that when you ask people for any kind of numerical feedback, it's mostly feeling based. It's like, what do I think about that? Did I like it or not? Some advantages, it's quick to enter. It's gamified. So what does gamified mean? It means that it's pretty fun. it's slightly funnier than, say, writing a 3-page review. No offense to anyone who enjoys writing 3-page reviews, but I think that generally speaking, this is not the most fun activity. Giving star rating, it's easy to apprehend. Obviously, you will need to learn what it means. For instance, like I told you, if you don't give 5 stars with the Uber driver, it means that you believe that guy or girl does not deserve to work for Uber. And when I learned about that, I was appalled because, like, in my mind, 4 out of 5 was already a great grade, but apparently not enough. As Toby pointed out, it's measurable, so you can have a feeling, and the more grades you have, the more, on average, you will be able to use it. Now, some negatives. It can be very polarized. Because it's feeling based, we might have a tendency as humans to be incredibly excited about something or incredibly frustrated about something. And so we might enter a review that is basically not really describing what we think of the product or service, but how we felt at this point.
So on that one, if you bring it up,
so this can be a lot more polarized than we'd like to be very easy to use. Now, let's try to apply the same reasoning to open questions. What would be the pros and cons? Very nice, Jeremy. So, pro and con, they allow you to write about anything. Yes, and that's actually correct. On the one hand, you can do whatever you want, and afterwards, whether it's actually motivating or demotivating is depends on each individual. Open questions require more thinking, indeed, than thinking based. You can't just, it's more than just hitting your phone once. Like you need to actually come up with sentences, therefore a reasoning. People can feel like their feedback isn't good enough and not want to write anything. Yes, indeed. People do have their own standards, and they could feel like, and we'll talk a bit about that later, oh yeah, that's just not good enough. I do not want to be ashamed by contributing that little, so I'd rather not contribute. Any other pros and cons? Nobody's typing, so I'm gonna proceed. So open questions are lengthier. It does take a lot of time because first you need to think and then you need to put it into text. It's also very non-gamified. It's more like what was I doing at school when I was writing an essay. As Isaac just put out, it can be intimidating. It's very non-measurable also, especially when it's very good feedback that is very balanced. Sometimes you're not even sure whether the person liked it or not, or maybe a little, or how that person feels. On the upside, it's very non-Manichaean. It's very hard to write a bunch of text that is incredibly one-sided. I mean, obviously you could, that happens, but it's nevertheless very hard. And the main pro is that there are some action items that will be provided, hopefully. There is a room to provide action items. So overall, what we can notice is that those two systems are almost exact opposites. As you can see, I've got some plus and minus, and on the other side, they become minus and plus. Why are they opposites? The left one, star rating, is more like gut feeling, while the open questions appeal more to a rational. Star rating is very quantitative, while open questions are very qualitative. Star rating is about performance. Open questions are about development. Basically, star ratings are better for TOs and attendees. Why TOs? Because they can very easily know if they want to have the same presenter again, they just need to look at grades. Why for attendees? Because this is just so much easier and faster. But now, when it comes to presenters, what you actually want is balanced and a balanced text with some action items. In a word, a review, as Isaac was putting. So what we can see over here, and guess why? If you take a look at Uber or Google Maps or Booking.com or whichever company, they mostly ask you to put a grade. That's because it's very easy, and this is going to give them a lot of data to analyze. The text is if they ask for it, is almost always optional. Now, if you think about how Google Maps work, their algorithm is basically putting reviews with photos and a lot of text. They are going to highlight them. Yes, there can be a nudge to give more information when you don't give 5 stars, indeed, for Uber and some other similar apps. Okay, so now that we've assessed that those two basics have qualities and weaknesses, I'd like to introduce you to 2 workshops that I'm using professionally to gather feedback. The first one is what is called plus delta. Basically, what is it about? It's basically plus what was great, delta what can I improve. It does have some drawbacks and some pros and cons as well. It's a bit lengthy, it's not crazy gamified, it can be intimidating. It's non-measurable, but it's also non-Manichaean and call to action item. It's basically an open-ended question divided in 2 questions to give a little bit more guidance. Basically, one question will be what was great, so people will feel incentivized to tell me some good things, and also incentivized to tell me what they didn't like and how I could improve. So that's already better because there's some additional guidance, but it's not outstanding yet. So here's plus delta V2. Tell me one thing you like and one thing that I can improve. What are the key differences between those two? in your opinion? Give the reader something to focus on, yes, but not a lot more than the one on the left. What are the differences between those two versions? What did change? There's a limit, one thing, yes, indeed. And there's another thing that is different. So it focuses the feedback on what is most important. Yes, agreed. And I'm gonna wait for Nikki to finish typing, and then I'll proceed. Liking something is an opinion. Needing improving something you can work on. So yes, indeed, the notion of liking is the other difference. So what does it change? Now we are down to just 2 items. So basically, it gives the audience a target. I wouldn't call it a limit, I would call it a target, and that target is very achievable. So it's very encouraging. It's still, unfortunately, not very gamified. However, it's less intimidating because by bringing the word like in it, now we're telling the audience, oh, you don't need to be correct. You can just share what you think, what you liked, and that's on you. Like, we're not going to criticize this. So it's encouraging. Still non-measurable, still non-Manichaean, still calling for action items. That part hasn't changed. So generally, as a teacher, this is what I'm using at the end of my first lecture with a class. I do not want, because I want to know which behaviors they liked and what they need. So, because like every class I'm teaching to is different and they have different needs. I don't want them to tell me that I'm great or that I suck. Well, I'd rather have them tell me that I'm great, but that's a different topic. But in any way, what I want them to be able to express themselves. But now, at the end of my classes, I'm using a different workshop. That workshop, which I name Fly Me to the Moon, is as such. Give me a grade out of 10, and what should have I done to get a 10? When doing this, we're now down to one item, so it's even easier. It's partially gamified, because like everybody likes giving grades, even when it's like super toxic such as males giving grades, talking about female bodies, for instance. Asking them for a grade, it calls to gut feeling. So once again, it's going to be easier. And now it becomes measurable. Even though I'm going to have people who strongly disliked or really strongly liked, I will be able to make an average. And that's, as Toby was pointing out earlier, a very decent way to evaluate over the course of classes. It's possibly a bit Manichaean. Like I said, I very often have lower grades coming from students who got a bad grade at what they delivered, unsurprisingly. And also, it's calling for fewer action items, because now I don't necessarily get the feedback of what I should do again. Instead, I've got a grade, but at least I know how I can improve. So it's a little bit it's basically it's a decent middle ground to get more engagement from the audience. And I can tell that I usually have more answers to fly me to the moon than to the plus delta. And some answers to fly me to the moon only give the grade, and they don't give me any area for improvement. Except that guy who once told me, well, I don't think there's anything to save in that class. And, well, I mean, I would agree with them. I don't think I could save him either. Different topic, though. So, when I say that it's really mid ground, it gathers both performance assessment and action item. The reason to give the grade out of 10 is an attempt to make people leave the Uber mindset of 1 or 5. A feedback I was given about that, like, what's the difference between 7 and 8? And that's a fair question. And my answer was like, it doesn't really matter. But basically, the goal is just to move away from how many stars am I putting. And especially, the delta part of it, speaking is hard, disincentivizes giving a 10. And it nudges, I wrote forces, but it's really more like nudges people to criticize. Since you felt disincentivized to put a 10, then you need to tell me something so I can improve. And all of that is really, it really relies on the nudge concept and making people feel that they're going to contribute. Now, I'd like to move on to the topic of mandatory feedback with Cat judging. That Cat is always giving the same feedback, which is, I'm hungry, you don't feed me nearly enough. That's obviously, from my point of view, totally wrong. So what's the purpose of mandatory feedback? And when their bowl is only 3/4 full, it usually lasts just a second at this rate. But so, what's the purpose of making feedback mandatory? Well, actually, I wrote purpose with a singular form, but that should have been a plural form. I'm correcting that on my template. And there are several of them. Some organizers use it as a form of attendance check. Yes, indeed. What else? But that only works if the feedback relates to the presentation and even something like great job. Agreed. What else? Mandatory feedback can encourage people who are on the fence to write out their thoughts. Fair enough. But what are the purposes? Why could we ask mandatory feedback? Well, I mean, yeah, I guess that could be a purpose to encourage people. Yes, my bad. Well, because we want feedback. Yes, indeed. Like we want feedback, so we will make people give us feedback, and that's reasonable. It can keep the participants engaged. Yes. In theory, it keeps people engaged more. Yes. I would agree with that. So I think we've got it. So basically, ensures presenters get feedback. It also helps with anchoring knowledge. When you make people formulate feedback, they need to go through what they heard, which means that they're being more active at remembering, and that will help them remembering in the long run. And finally, it's also a part of the process to check FOIL eligibility, because most of the conferences giving out foils to attendees require well, to be there and ideally to listen to it. But now there are limits to a quantity requirement of feedback. Before moving there, just reading, so Isaac is saying mandatory constructive feedback can also signal that we actually do want constructive feedback and are not just asking for optics. Yes. And we're going to get there. You're just ahead. So one of the limits of requiring a certain quantity of feedback is how do you treat generic sentences like great job, interesting, nothing to say? Is that feedback? Well, not really. But if you've got too many of them, it becomes longer to parse for presenters. As someone who is presenting very often, I've realized that out of sometimes 30 to 40 feedbacks that I receive, only 10 of them actually matter a lot, and the rest, I mean, they're not bad. I mean, it's pretty nice to read, hey, thanks, that was great, but it was not necessarily incredibly useful. So now, this means that we need to go through a quality check, and Jeremy is right on point here. Open-ended mandatory feedback can lead, I would not say often leads, but can lead to poor quality fluff sentence. It's making a worse experience for attendees because even when you don't have much to say because the topic was not outstanding or you didn't like it, you were not like deep in it, but you need to give feedback, it's pretty bad. It's and it can lead to, well, I hope this will be meaningful enough, or am I gonna get denied foils? And I made a mistake, unfortunately, on my animation here, which I'm gonna fix before I forget. 20-minute warning, that should work. Thanks, Isaac. So, and that also leads, in my opinion, to a worse experience for the organizer. How many times are you as an organizer who's requiring mandatory feedback do have questions. Hey, is that piece of feedback good enough to get the foils? Because ultimately, what you would like is not people to try to meet the bare minimum, it's just to send in something meaningful. But as a teacher, I can tell you that when I tell my students, hey, rather than asking me what is the bare minimum you should do, what if you were actually doing something? You spend more time trying to know what is the limit than working. Because obviously, because I need to evaluate them so that they get their diploma. It's not illegitimate, but it's totally counterproductive. And finally, if you do a quality check, but you let some of the quoting Jeremy poor quality fluff sentences go through, then the entire purpose is defeated. And so, in my opinion, I think it's better to let feedback be optional, even when your conference is foil supported. So Isaac's saying, I've tried running conferences that require constructive feedback and it went quite well. And I agree with that, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So now I like to talk about, that you don't need to be sorry. Like, thanks for being engaged and saying clever things. It never hurts. But now, before moving there, I'd like to talk about the notion of requiring people to give their name to enter feedback. So, what's the purpose of it? That's a question for you. So that the recipient can reach out for clarification. Yes, definitely. Keep people from randomly just dumping on other people. Yes, agreed. And finally, and attendance check purpose. Yep, 3 out of 3. Congrats, Toby. Yep. But now, what could be the possible limits of that, in your opinion? Having name shared, I think having names shared helps encourage feedback to be a collaboration rather than one-sided. Yes, I agree that it's a good nudge towards collaboration. People might not want to stick their names to critical feedback. Yes, correct. Limit the chances of getting candid feedback. Yes, correct. People could be afraid of retaliation. Yes, indeed. Sometimes you can't think of a tactful way to put something, especially to a higher ranked person. Yes, correct. People might worry that having their name stuck to a feedback might devalue the feedback. Yes, definitely. I only had 2, but you have like so many more than I had when I was writing this. to me, there was a fear of being identified as delivering either low quality feedback or inappropriate feedback. So I guess it's kind of um, these are kind of like broader aspects of everything you said. Low quality being critic, and the person being like perceiving the critic as being inappropriate or something like that. But now, as it was put, there is a possibility that by being anonymous, and I think this is also a societal issue, we tend to believe there is this current societal issue that being anonymous on the internet could be increasing inappropriate behaviors, and that could be definitely a concern. And as a former organizer for French conferences, I've had to deal with some very negative or even sometimes what I call trash feedback. So what I call trash feedback is very negative and non-constructive feedback. And I've received some other presenters have received some. And here's how I've been dealing with it from the organizer perspective. First, I was reading feedback before passing it to presenters. And when I was seeing some trash feedback, I educated presenters on how to take the best out of it. And yes, I will agree that trash feedback is just the worst. At some point, I have been considering removing them. Yes, actually I did. And then I decided that the best people to consult were the presenters. And all of them were like, just ship it. So which I did. And I figured that I figured that in the end, it was better to not do censorship, but more like give people the tools to take the best out of it. So now as a presenter, what did I do? First, I asked myself, can I find something edible in this garbage? Then, can I contact the author? Because sometimes you've got ways to identify, or maybe they even let their name. That happens. And if I can't find anything that's actionable and I cannot contact the author, I just delete it because I can't do anything out of that. So ultimately, they lost some time. Maybe they felt better, they discarded some frustration. Totally cool. But for me, can't do anything about that, deleting it and move on. Because there's not a lot that I can do. But yeah, one of the key aspects is when I asked presenters at the French conferences, so if that happened, what would you like? And they were like, yeah, just like ship it. Worst case, we'll know something. And I also believe that there's a lot of curiosity going on, saying, okay, what do people say about me? Which is something very human. So overall, I believe that it's much better to have optional identity. The way we're doing it in France and Isaac is doing as well is, so in France it's like, would you like to write your name? And Isaac is doing, write your name. Do you want your name to be associated to your feedback? Which is like pretty much the same. Obviously, Isaac has been mandating feedback to some of their conferences. So there, as part of the check, the name was needed. But yes, generally speaking, I believe that optional identity is is overall much better. So I've analyzed some data that is like more or less supporting my thoughts, and obviously I've got my biases. So I'm not even pretending that everything that I'm saying here is the ultimate truth. I'm no prophet. I'm just trying to describe a reasoning, and I do not pretend to do more than that. But now let's nevertheless move into some statistics. So these are some statistics that we had at the French conferences since we started running them in autumn 2020. So generally speaking, so except in the very first one where we asked people a very open question, hence the one, and it was mandatory to reply to it, which was actually a mistake. I just mishandled my Google form. All of the other conferences were following the model of tell us one thing that you liked and one thing that the presenter could improve, hence the 2/N. Two different questions to collect feedback, and it was not mandatory. In the next column, I got interested in how many parallel tracks did we run and how many different seminars did we run. Column number 3, number of folks attending. Column number 4 is a number of feedback received. Then number of feedback per folk. Then number of action items. So to get that, I basically went through each of the feedback entered, and I checked if there were some actual action items or suggestions, or even when someone was like, well, this was not great, but it was very easy to understand that the action item was stop doing that, it would count as an action item. Anonym AI is how many action items did we get by being from anonymous folks. Negative feedback with action items in the prior to last column, and anonym trash feedback. So my conclusions about that. So first, you can see that in the past 6 months, we've had a huge drop in number of feedback given and action item given. It's less of a drop for action items, as you can see, but it's still non-negligible. And this was just give me 1 second. I'm sorry about that. So something that a conclusion we had with the current organizers is that when we do not have enough different topics, the number of feedback is going down. Because most likely we give feedback on topics we reasonably believe we understand. And it's very hard to give feedback on topics we know nothing about. Another possibility is giving topics on very technical, giving feedback, on very technical topics is probably harder. one of the consequences, though, was that the percentage of action items as a direct result went up. And that's and that's a direct that's a direct consequence, which also means that from the presenter point of view, there's fewer lines to go through with more action items. So it's a slightly more time efficient for the presenters. So we could see it as, oh, attendees don't want to give feedback, but at the same time, for presenters, we could perceive it as being slightly better. So so when you will be able to access my slides, because I will share them. So mandatory feedback leads to a lower percentage of action item. Obviously, it's statistically not outstanding, but well. Fewer seminars, fewer pieces of feedback, quite possibly, but fewer pieces of feedback, higher percentage of action items. Another thing we considered is because we're doing 4 or 5 conferences a year in France, there could be a potential fatigue of entering feedback. Quite a lot of the feedback I've been seeing was, hey, you had technical problems, etc. So maybe at some point people get fed up of writing the exact same thing. And also, like I said, not all topics make it easy to give feedback. Now, when it comes to anonymity, on average, approx 1 folk out of 6 who is providing an actual action item remained anonymous. That's huge, 1 out of 6. There's a very low amount of very negative feedback, as you can see, and there's an even lower amount of trash feedback. And which means that basically, considering the actual percentage of very negative / trash feedback, it's probably better to allow anonymity, because we might be losing more action items than trash feedback. It's also possible that the way you're asking the question is very leading. For instance, a story about that. It's been believed that all Japanese air fighters pilots during the Second World War were volunteering to become kamikazes. However, it was clear that the way the question was asked was, who amongst you does not want to serve the emperor in the war? Which was making it incredibly loaded and very hard to say, well, I don't want to be loyal to the emperor. Now, I've just compiled some statistics about the experimental conference that Isaac has been sharing with me. So, you could see on the 5th one that the amount of feedback was incredibly low, but it was a very different structure. It was just like 20-minute seminars on our passions. So it was probably less appealing to give actual feedback. The higher percentage of action item, in my opinion, is due to the way Isaac is actually asking for the feedback, where he's mentioning action item. And that is actually something that I don't entirely know what to do entirely, but it's definitely something. It feels a bit more forced, but as long as it's an incentive, it's actually pretty good. Having only one question, though, makes it harder to parse between between the positives and the negatives. When I was reading all of the comments to determine what had an action item and what not, I spent significantly more time this afternoon. And as we've seen with the French conferences, fewer pieces of feedback, higher percentage of action items. It seemed that at this conference, it's not just one folk out of 6, it's one folk out of 3 providing action items while remaining anonymous. And there's like no very negative or no trash feedback. So maybe actually giving trash feedback is a very French thing. I don't know, but that was very very interesting. There's one conference, the one that had 1,200 pieces of feedback that I could not anonymize. I could not pass. Sorry for that. So, yep, sorry. I again, just give me 1 second, please. I missed my animation. Yep. Okay, so moving on to the final slide. So my best practice is to incentivize feedback. Show that you care. I think it's important to move away from stuff like, in case you have feedback, or don't forget the feedback form, because the first one implies that it's unlikely, but just in case, and the second one, the brain handles very negative, very poorly negative formulas. So by using positive wording such as, hey, presenter is looking for your feedback, or feedback is crucial, and guess what? We have a form for that. So yeah, generally speaking, try to move away, try to use positive wording to incentivize people, accompany people. So, like I said, with plus delta, what was great, what can I improve? You can turn it into, tell me one thing you liked or more, and one thing that I can improve or more. Basically, not making it an achievable objective without being a limit. And make people confident. If you start with feedback must be meaningful, without action items, feedback is useless, or you must give us your name, this is putting like a lot of pressure on people, and humans don't handle pressure at all. Instead, it's better to be encouraging. Every little thing can help. Action items are the best, and to achieve that, ask yourself how you would have done. This is also guiding people as to what they should be doing to be able to give good feedback. And finally, tell the presenter who you are in case they would like to follow up. And as I read it, I realize that it should most probably read, feel free to tell the presenter who you are in case they would like to follow up, or something like that. So we're reaching the end of this. I'm at 65 minutes. I'm pretty proud of myself because I usually go way over time. Thanks a lot for participating. So here's once again the link to my blog. And if you like learning, and you have some money available, I strongly encourage you to donate to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is one of the things that I believe is the most crucial in this world. It's like free collaborative knowledge. So and now give me feedback. So good reason why this seminar is way better than its previous iteration and way worse than its next. And that's thanks to you, realistically. So let's go with the plus deltas that I presented. Tell me one thing you liked or more, and one thing that I can improve or more. I'll read everything. And so Mark Mason is not around, but he gave me a lot of feedback and I implemented half of it, I think. So you've got the link to the conference form, and I leave you on that small cartoon, which I like a lot. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thanks a lot for participating. I wish I had more time to engage a bit more with you, but thanks for making this work. And enjoy the lunch break that I didn't eat too much on. Thank you.